So it's 10, so let's get started. Welcome, everyone. I think if there's a few people, we're still waiting for 3 or 4 of us to come on to the call, but most of us are here. The first thing is just that we're asking everyone, for those of you who just got on the call, we're asking everyone to add your town, country, city, your town, city, or village and your country next to your name in your profile. So the way to do that is you just click on your image and you go to rename in the drop-down menu that pops up. So we'd love to know where everyone is. And also when our speaker comes in, we'd love to have him know where all of you are. So just go ahead and take a minute to do that if you haven't already. Okay, so I think we're almost all here. So we'll get started. Awesome, okay. So welcome everyone. Hello and welcome to the first session of Project Green course. My name is Natasha Monatau. I think I've met most of you, and I'm the project manager and facilitator for this incredible program. So we have a really exciting session ahead of us today, and it's wonderful to be with you all and to see us all here together. And so I'll just give a quick roadmap of how this session will flow, just to give you an idea of the agenda. So we'll start with just taking a look at the syllabus really quick. I won't go through the entire thing. I've shared it with you all via email. So we'll go through the syllabus. We will look at some shared agreements in the syllabus. And I just want to give a quick reminder to you all, if you haven't already, please join the Google Classroom. I think almost everybody is already in there, so we're doing well there. And there you'll find any course materials, any readings. We haven't got any readings up there at the moment. I think week 1 is, we'll have a little bit of a lighter week in terms of the assignments. But I'd love you to familiarize yourself with the Google Classroom. And then I'll give you all a talk. I'll share a little bit about my personal background and my perspective on the theme of this week, which is activate your voice. So I'll share a little bit about my journey through that theme. Judy will give her talk as well, and she'll let us know a little bit about the history of Turning Green, how the organization came to be, and really just her journey to activating her voice and stepping into leadership. And then we'll take some time in our pod meetings to get to know each other. So we'll actually be leaving the larger room and we'll go into breakouts. Cassie will send us into breakouts so that we can be in our pods for the first time. So just to give a quick explanation of the pods, for the first 2 weeks of the course, you'll stay in the same breakout rooms, the same breakout group, so that you can actually get to know each other a little better. We're doing this since it's a virtual classroom space. We just want to make sure that everybody gets that smaller, more intimate time to spend with each other. So we'll go into breakout pods. We will get to know each other a little bit. We will start to prepare for the speaker who's coming today, Matt Scott from Project Drawdown. Cassie will share his bio and the Project Drawdown links in the chat. So we'll gather in those pods for about 15 minutes, and then we'll come back to the larger room to hear from Matt Scott, and you'll all have some questions ready for him that you can send once we're in the larger room. You can just send those in the chat, and I'll be asking him those questions in a Q&A after his talk. So I'll be moderating that and calling on you all so that we can hear your beautiful questions for him. So that's just a quick overview of how the course, how today will run. We will be keeping time since it is such a short session and we really want to give time to Matt. We will be keeping time. So just be aware that that's gonna, your TAs might let you know some of the, if you're at time or if you need to come back to the larger breakout room. So just keep that in mind. So I'll go to the syllabus right now. I'd love for you all to join me there. Cassie will send a link again in the chat. So for the syllabus, I'm not going to go through the description and structure. I think we're all pretty familiar with the, with the purpose of this gathering, which is to really gather as people who care for the environment, as people who are stepping into leadership around environment. It's a space for us to reflect and act upon the potential for creating change, for creating a more just and resilient future. So I'll just go right down to the weekly course themes. So we will be starting with this week, of course, which is Activate Your Voice. That's the theme. And we will hear from Matt Scott, who'll share about his journey to becoming a climate storytelling and engagement manager at Project Drawdown. And then week 2 will focus on environmental storytelling. So we'll learn about how to craft compelling and inspiring stories about the environment. During this week, we'll just have a deep dive into the some of the strategies and tools and resources that we can access around how to tell good stories that move people to action, that inspire folks around environment. And then week 3, we'll go to energize your leadership. Week 4, that week, we have a really exciting lineup of speakers. We'll hear from 3 really amazing leaders, climate leaders, and they will teach us about science, policy, and leadership. Week 4 will focus on climate justice, the nexus of footprint and climate justice. Again, we have a really exciting lineup there of visiting speakers. And just a reminder, the Monday sessions will have a bunch of speakers coming. The Saturday sessions, sometimes we will have an expert come in to lead a skills workshop. But usually those Saturday sessions will be workshops where we actually get to dig in and practice some of the skills and tools that we've been learning throughout the week. Week 5, food farming and stewardship. Week 6, we'll think through water. So starting week 5, we'll actually start to focus on aspects of environment. So we'll be thinking about food, land stewardship, essentially. And then we'll move to water and oceans. So week 6 is freshwater resources. And then week 7, we'll think about the ocean. And we'll hear from some really incredible scientists and experts working on oceans. Week 8, we'll take a deep dive into entrepreneurship and the role that ethical business and responsible consumption can play in having an impact with regard to environment. Week 9, we'll look at nature as a design blueprint. This is a really exciting week where we get to think about biomimicry as a tool for cultivating solutions and impact projects. It's around this time that you're going to start workshopping your climate activation projects. So that will be an exciting moment where you get to work through some design thinking strategies, some systems thinking strategies, and have some workshops to kind of get you going with your projects. Weeks 10 through 15, we'll be diving deep into our final projects. And while we won't be meeting regularly as an entire group on the Monday and Saturday sessions, sometimes there'll be community events during those times where we'll have a film screening, we'll have discussions, we'll actually gather to work on our projects, and the TAs will be really involved in hosting those community spaces. So that's the lineup that we have, and I just want to give a quick rundown of our community guidelines and ingredients. And I'd love for you all to give a thumbs up and just say, okay, or yes, once I've read these. So I've drawn these up, and if you have any ideas, you're welcome to send those to me of what to add to this list of community guidelines and agreements. I'd love to be co-creating it. So the idea is to, in this course, to really listen, actively listen and engage with your cohort, with your pods and with each other, and try to respond respectfully to each other's comments and ideas in the class. Number 2 is just to be prepared, show up for every session, ready to contribute your ideas based on what you've learned through the week's readings, through the videos that we'll be watching, and through the reflection questions. Again, all of these materials will be in the Google Classroom. And then number 3 is just many of the visiting speakers. Oh, one more point on number 2. It's really important that we show up in real time for all of the sessions. That's a big component of the course and something that we're all agreeing to, since we are virtual and we are online. It's really important that we get that time together so that we can all stay on the same page. The sessions will be recorded, but the idea is that that's just a tool for you to go back and remember things that you might have forgotten, or review some of the materials. And then third, we'll have so many of the visiting speakers are volunteering their time to be with us. And so just be really, really prepared for their visits as best as you can by reading their bios, checking out their websites. I'll be sending those to you before each session so that you can familiarize yourself with who's going to be speaking, and you can ask really great questions. Their time is limited and our time with them is limited. So it's really important that we take advantage of that. A lot of these folks are, visionaries, leaders in their fields, and they're generous enough to show up for us so that we can learn from their journeys and their experience. And I encourage you, don't be afraid to ask them questions or to share with them what inspired you about their talk. Sometimes we'll have breakout rooms directly with the speakers, and there's no bad questions here. Just go for it. And yeah, feel free. Your opinions are really what will be the lifeblood of this course, your perspectives, your thoughts, your ideas. So don't be afraid to contribute those. And engaging in dialogue with the speakers is the best way to make them feel welcome. Number 4 is just to engage in authentic, respectful discourse, recognizing that, hey, sometimes we disagree, and that's okay. As long as we're acknowledging and respecting the fact that each other's ideas are valid, and that we might have different worldviews and backgrounds and ideas, and that's okay. It's a normal part of any kind of discourse, and actually it's kind of how we learn. So just bearing that in mind. And number 5 is just to really have fun. This is a non-academic course for a reason. We are here to learn about what excites us most and how to contribute positively to a transformative time that we're living through on planet Earth. So let's just enjoy the process as much as possible. Let's be here for each other. Let's show up. Let's respond to each other in the chat, in the Google chat, and in the Zoom. So that's just a quick rundown of the course. And then I'd love to share a little bit about my background and my views on this theme of activating your voice. So I'll just get started and dive right in so that we can hear from Judy as well. And I'm just going to set a timer for myself so that I keep to time. So a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Botswana. And as a young girl, I was actually teased for being one of those people who got upset about littering. I would call people out and host neighborhood cleanups. But I often felt like my focus on protecting the environment was an annoyance, something to be kind of embarrassed about. Still, I couldn't help but feel this powerful connection to the beauty of the land that I grew up in. acacia and baobab trees. There were leopards and snakes and hills that seemed to stretch on to the end of the planet. I left home when I was 18 for a scholarship to complete my high school in Switzerland. The school was tucked away in a small village in the French part of the Alps, where we were lucky enough to go skiing and go on mountain expeditions every weekend. And during these trips, we'd learn about the natural world from teachers and guides that had lived in the Alps for decades. I went on to attend college in California and again, lived in awe of my surroundings. There it was the Pacific wild coast, quiet redwood forests in the mountains behind campus, all this biodiversity. And it was around this time that I began to learn about social justice and equity, about the earth systems and environmental storytelling. And this was during my undergraduate and graduate programs. So I believe that the stories we tell shape our reality. It's arguably a chicken and egg thing. But for many years, humanity has been kind of fixated on apocalyptic narratives that highlight the destructive force that our presence has created on planet Earth. Since the moment we first discovered that our carbon output as a species causes global warming, emissions have risen exponentially. So I think the time is ripe for a new kind of story, one that explores our capacity as a species to become a force for environmental renewal. I'm interested in stories that center Black and Indigenous communities as stewards of the earth, as climate leaders and solutions experts. I'd love to tell stories about how our land histories are actually intertwined with the trauma and violence of settler colonialism. And above all, I care most for stories that center the possibility of healing from those harms, of restoring land and water rights to those who seek to do the work of ecological tending. So this has been my journey to activating my voice through uplifting the perspectives of communities that are most marginalized by the climate crisis. Our wonderful speaker who will join us later today, Matt Scott, calls this passing the mic to those who often go unheard in the climate space. And I just love that. So when I was growing up in Botswana, drought was a backdrop of daily life. Sometimes water came out of the tap and sometimes it didn't. My mother is an avid gardener and she started to realize the need to transition our garden to more drought-resistant plants. So our yard in Gaborone, my city, which was once a parched lawn dotted with rose bushes, is now an oasis of indigenous plants that know how to survive in the desert, that understand how to thrive on very little. So the aloes flower in the middle of winter, which is the driest point in the year. And their magnificent blooms attract sunbirds and bees that drink thirstily from the rare nectar. I want us to become like the aloes and cacti and succulents that know how to live on less, that provide a haven for other species in times of need. I see environmental stewardship as a process of entering into right relationship with nature and with each other, understanding all the time that we are not separate from the cycles of abundance and scarcity that the earth offers up, teaching us through seasons how to be with change. And in this time of climate uncertainty, to use the words of a storyteller that I love called Kate Olson, how can we learn to be with change and transformation and to emerge stronger and wiser and more grateful for the gifts of this sacred planet? I wonder how we can account for past harms by caring for marginalized communities in the present. To me, care is characterized by an exchange of resources. So the giving of your own abundance to support another. And where climate justice rightfully seeks accountability and repair for what has been done, to me, environmental equity centers the possibility of radically transforming systems of power and actually upending hierarchies of knowledge that no longer serve us as a species. So I look forward to learning alongside you all in the weeks to come, and to learning from your unique ways of knowing and seeing the world. I want you to know that your ideas are valid, your voice is needed. So thank you for being here, for sharing your wisdom and showing up in this course for the planet. Thank you for listening to my talk. I'd love to take a second to just introduce Judy Schills, the Executive Director of Turning Green, to share her story of activating her voice amidst a changing climate and how she's learned to navigate environmental leadership in a pretty challenging landscape. Judy spent the last 26 years of her life spearheading grassroots community projects. So following a successful career as an Emmy award-winning TV producer, Judy co-founded Turning Green 16 years ago in response to a health crisis in her community. Turning Green has gone on to become a mighty force for global environmental education and for food justice in California schools. And I've been humbled to join a team with so much heart and courage, stewarded by this fearless leader, Judy Schills. Judy, over to you.
Thank you, Natasha, and thank you for your beautiful words and for your kind introduction. So I spent some time talking about the history of the organization the last time we gathered. So I want to dive a little bit more deeply into my story. And every journey starts with a story. Mine was informed by my early career path, as Natasha mentioned, working in live television production for a network in the United States called ABC, the American Broadcasting Company. Live television taught me some early and long-lasting lessons. There really was never a margin for error, and no was not an option. During my years at ABC, I was one of few women working in a very male-dominated industry. I started at a very entry-level position and basically did what was asked of me with no questions. And through that time, I had the gift of travel, and I went all over the world to work on producing sporting events, which was my focus. It opened my eyes to people, humanity, cultures, boldness. I went to countries that the United States had no relations with and met people I could never have known. And because of this incredible gift in my life, little did I know then, but it laid the groundwork for the rest of my life. After years in New York, I moved to Los Angeles, and during my time there, quite unintentionally, I developed the first reality-based TV show. It only came about because it fed my passion for wanting to travel cross-country for an adventure that I had never experienced because I started work at such a young age. It turned into a special for Fox Television and prompted an era of reality television. I quickly exited from that journey, and my entire path changed shortly after that. I got married and moved to the Bay Area, right outside of San Francisco, where I am right now. I was working for a local TV show, pregnant with my now 30-year-old daughter, Erin, and preparing to interview the author of a book called Diet for a Poisoned Planet, an in-depth look at the contaminants in our food supply. I read it cover to cover in one sitting, and those few hours forever changed my life. I went down to the local greengrocer and transformed my life from, as they say, conventional to organic for my soon-to-arrive daughter. As my daughter says, she was born into a green bubble, and her life was organicized before she even made her entry. Suddenly, I was an activist for her and the generation that she was born into, committing to do everything I could to heal the people and our planet. And I had no idea at that moment in time what that even meant. As the years passed, I realized where my strengths were, and I started to understand that my voice was my power. I learned that if I was confident and stood up as a leader, that even if I wasn't sure just exactly what my next step should be, Others would join me. We'd learn together. In 2002, a bold headline in the Bay Area was that our breast and prostate cancer rates had risen 60% in 8 years. And at a meeting that I attended, I heard from our leadership that they couldn't turn the tide on that statistic. There just wasn't enough money. How could that be when people were losing their lives, I thought? I couldn't just sit by. And so about 5 months later, on November 9th, 2002, I mobilized a couple thousand people, volunteers, to go door to door to the 50,000 households in our Marin County community. The goal was to raise the roof on a statistic that had to be reversed. The story of a community coming together was resonant all over the world. In fact, many journalists from around the globe came to witness what was unfolding in one small community and followed many volunteers around as they went door to door. The outcome was that one of our leaders, a senator from California who happened to live in Marin County, had a volunteer knock on her door. When they asked her why she thought cancer rates were so high here in this community, she took it on as a challenge. And with her powerful support, things began to change. That moment, that campaign, made me realize that I could do whatever I set my mind to. On that day, 25% of our volunteers were mobilized, powerful high school students. I committed to myself that I wanted to work with their generation to educate, empower, and mobilize so they could have a future that would be healthy, just, and resilient. And that was when I started with my daughter, our now 17-year-old nonprofit, Turning Green. Today, after building many inspiring and impactful campaigns with the most amazing youth, working with tens of thousands of young leaders, dreaming and doing, and finding hope in even the most trying times, here we are in our Project Green course Zoom lecture hall. Students, each of you, teaching assistants, a brilliant program director, in a world that needs us all to guide it in a new direction, to find solutions in our communities, to be bold and to trust, to find confidence in our decision-making, even though we might feel like we don't have a clue. One of our student interns was sharing that she did things during her summer journey with us that she never could have imagined she could do, that she would be given a task and not have any idea where to begin. Our team suggests and mentors, but then invites our interns and our students to spread their wings. She said at first she felt like an imposter, that she didn't really believe that she knew what she was doing, but then she did. She found incredible strength and power within, and she did brilliant work. Sometimes that's all it takes, stepping up to the front, dreaming and then doing, and bringing along others who look to you as a leader, and then you start believing in yourself. And truly, it's all it takes, a belief in yourself, in your ideas, in your path, and gathering a group of like-minded friends, stakeholders, experts, to fill in all the things you might not yet know, and then going out and changing the world. If nothing else, that's what we hope you will take away from the time spent together and through this course. Use your voice, ideate, innovate, activate, accentuate, and believe that you can and you will change the world. Craft the journey that you want to lead with passion and purpose that will fulfill you. My highlight of a moment in time that is filled with challenge is today. And you are here, ready, willing, and able to do what it takes to be present together, to learn from and with each other, and to show up to fight the fights and navigate the challenges in front of all of us. And through our work, to find hope, wisdom, courage, and strength to do the extraordinary, because that is what we all have. That's our superpower. Welcome to our family, and welcome to Project Green course. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you, Judy. It's so wonderful to hear more about your journey, and thank you for those beautiful words. So I would love for us all to go into our pods. And as I mentioned, you'll be in those pods for the next 2 weeks. So get to know each other, and then, brainstorm some questions for Matt, who will be joining us very shortly. And we'll come back to the main room and we will hear from Matt. So enjoy your time in your pods.
Have fun, you guys. Welcome back, everybody.
Awesome. So everyone is coming back. Yay, I think we're all back. Great. Okay, awesome. Well, as you will all see, we have been joined by the wonderful Matt Scott. So welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed your first pod meeting, or for some of you, it's your second, and there'll certainly be more to come throughout the weeks. And it's a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker today. He's going to talk to us about climate storytelling and his journey to activating his voice as a climate leader. So Matt Scott is the manager of storytelling and engagement at Project Drawdown, which is an incredibly comprehensive resource for climate solutions. Inspired by human-centered design, Matt shapes and implements Project Drawdown's strategy for climate solutions storytelling. He also uses his career to share the stories of underrepresented change makers, what he calls passing the mic to those who often go unheard in the climate space. This is a subject in which we should all be deeply interested, because I think it's by connecting with our own unique place in the climate movement and really creating space for others that we start to become masterful storytellers ourselves and truly step into leadership. So in Matt's remarkable career, he served as Global Community Director and storyteller of the world's largest global hackathon, NASA's International Space Apps Challenge, alongside organizations like the Australian government, Pivotal Ventures by Melinda Gates, USAID, the United Nations, Nike, Walmart, and also the Obama White House to center inclusive stories and to drive action in the impact ecosystem. He's also the creator and host of Let's Care, where he's interviewed and learned from 100+ unlikely or underrepresented change makers since 2017. So please join me, everyone, in welcoming the amazing Matt Scott.
Wow, thank you so much, Natasha, for having me and for that comprehensive introduction, and also just for giving a lot of the background, which is probably going to be helpful for folks to understand more of my perspective and where I'm coming from. But hello, it's so great to be here with all of you. And the first thing I'm going to do as we get started out is share my screen. And just without further ado, in order to dive in, I want to start out by asking you this first question. And over the course of this talk, I'll ask a couple of questions, actually one right after this, but I would love if you could respond in the chat to this question with a word, a few words. What comes to mind when you think of global warming and climate change? And I'd love to hear from folks with what initially comes to mind. Again, it doesn't need to be anything long, but yeah, what comes to mind? So I'll start reading some of these responses a little bit later. It's interesting to see them come in, but definitely put those into the chat because I will come back to this later on, even though I am reading them as they come in. Thank you for responding with those. And before I go on to the next question, I would just encourage folks to take maybe 10 more seconds to put your responses into the chat there. So the next question that I want to ask, and I love to see those responses, is who or what sparked your passion for climate action? So this one's a little bit deeper. This one might not be as quick of a gut reaction, but I would love to hear from folks. What was it like for you, or who was it that actually sparked your passion for climate action? And I'm starting to see some of these come in already. Awesome. Again, who or what sparked that passion for you? Great. So I will come back to this question also, but keep dropping those in the chat. So my name is Matt Scott. As mentioned, I was introduced to START, but I lead storytelling at Project Drawdown. And, I joined Project Drawdown in November last year. So it's almost been a year. Before that, there was a lot of other stuff that thankfully Natasha went through in my introduction. But, over the last several months, really, I've just kind of been developing and figuring out how to talk about my work with storytelling at Project Drawdown and how to link storytelling with climate change, because oftentimes when we think of climate change, unfortunately, we don't necessarily think of stories. And so what I want to do today, really talking with this group, is to talk about not only the importance of stories, but more importantly, the importance of your story and how that has power to reach this point of drawdown, as we say, which I'll talk about more as we go on, and how your story has this power to actually do something about climate change and global warming. So I mentioned this question that I asked a second ago: who or what sparked your passion for climate action? And going back to the chat, there were so many different responses. Thank you again, folks, for dropping those in. And so just to read some of the ones that I saw come through. Someone mentioned their freshman year professor as the person who sparked their passion for climate action. A high school instructor was another person who sparked their passion. Turning Green, of course, this wonderful group, is another place that sparked Ella's passion for climate action. Others talked about the need to educate, the injustice that was taking place as something that sparked climate action. So it's interesting that we see some people had people in mind who sparked the action that they did, or courses that they took that sparked their action. Someone else mentioned books that they read. Actually, most people referred to people that they, or people or experiences like education and being in the classroom that really influenced them. Documentaries, our changing relationship with nature. So there are a lot of different things that spark our climate journeys. And I asked this question because about a month ago, I was talking with a group of educators who really are focused on sharing climate change with their communities, and they want to know more about storytelling. And I asked them two questions. One of them was who or what sparked their passion for climate action. But the other question was what they were doing. What are you doing to get your students, your communities to care about climate action? And the answers were vastly different. So what they were doing was sharing statistics and research and data with their students to convince them about climate change, as opposed to sharing the stories or having heart-to-heart conversations or some of the things that actually inspired them, and using those tactics to reach others. And so one thing I'd encourage as we go along is to value the power of your story, value the power of how you got involved, because that could be the same thing that gets someone else involved. But to start out, to talk about my journey, it took me a while to become really involved in and interested in, fully committed to, I should really say, climate action, honestly. I grew up as a kid of the 90s, and I watched a lot of different TV shows, but one of my favorite ones was this one here, Captain Planet and the Planeteers, which is all about Captain Planet, this superhero here, along with 5 young people from across the world, probably like a lot of you from all over the place, probably from some of the places that you're from, taking action against climate. And I was too young at the time to fully appreciate or connect with Captain Planet and how that related to our world. People weren't reinforcing the message for me of Captain Planet with climate change and this being something I should care about. And so while I was exposed to this as a kid, I didn't become a climate solutions storyteller because of it. I didn't even really know what those things were. So flash forward to where I live now, beautiful Washington, D.C. And I moved here about 10 years ago. And when I moved to Washington, D.C., one of the things that I experienced was that, well, it's a very walkable city. I would spend a lot of time outside, and my asthma, which I experienced as a kid growing up, suddenly unexpectedly intensified, and I couldn't make sense of it. And so I found myself at the doctor asking about what was going on. And what she did was prescribe me an inhaler. But what she didn't do was really explain why this was the way that this was, why things were the way that they were, the way that that climate change and global warming and the hottest summers on record in Washington, D.C. at the time were affecting the asthma that I grew up with and causing me to experience health issues that I didn't want to experience. And so even though I was impacted by poor air quality, by the hottest summers on record, by a lot of these different factors caused by climate change, I didn't really know that, which I would say that I'm not even embarrassed to say, because we don't talk about climate change enough. And so flash forward just until a few years ago, I was working on the NASA Space Apps Challenge, the world's largest global hackathon event. And one of the big things I was doing was encouraging people to create solutions to problems on Earth and in space. And yet, even when I was helping people or guiding people in creating solutions to problems with air quality, problems with climate change and global warming, I hadn't really thought to myself what I could do and how I could use my voice more specifically to address climate change. That was until a friend, someone who didn't have a massive platform or an animated TV show or whatever it might be, a friend told me about his experience at the Climate Reality Leadership Training. Actually, this one that you see the picture of was hosted in Los Angeles, 2,000 plus people. So if you look closely enough, you could probably find me somewhere in this crowd. This Climate Reality Leadership Training, if any of you are familiar with climate reality, was something that is primarily hosted by Al Gore and his Climate Reality Project. And while I was in this group of 2,000 people who all were passionate about climate, I didn't truly feel connected to it until I saw this panel on climate justice, which frankly was one of the few panels that had people of color on it. So as a young Black person, I kind of felt a little out of place in the sea of 2,000 plus people. But when I saw this panel of people who looked like me, whose stories resonated with me, I started to see more of myself in climate change and see how I related. And more specifically, I heard the story of Naleli Kobo, who was one of the people on the panel. And just like me, Naleli has asthma. And that's when I started to perk up and kind of see, wait a second, my asthma relates to this issue that we're all here talking about. And this thing of climate change isn't only something that we need to think ahead about, but it's something that is very much so impacting us each and every day. Again, these are all things that I'm sure all of you know, and I know too now, but at the time, what it took was hearing a story that somehow mirrored my own for me to truly learn and understand that, wow, like this is something that impacts each of us, whether or not we realize it each and every day. And the stories that we hear, the stories that we tell, if they're ones that reflect our experiences, if they're ones that relate to who we are, or if they feel within reach, well, it's easy for us to see ourselves in them. But oftentimes we don't have those stories. And so one quote that I love, and I wouldn't dare attribute this to a single person because it's been credited to a lot of people over time, but there's this saying that you can't be what you can't see. And in my storytelling career, I've really embraced this idea that my role is to really help people see themselves in the social impact space, in the climate solution space, whatever that might be. At Project Drawdown, as mentioned, we're the world's leading resource for climate solutions. And, we have a lot of resources to help people embrace those solutions. But unfortunately, I asked this question toward the start of this talk about 10 minutes ago or so. And unfortunately, when people are asked this question of what comes to mind when you think of climate change and global warming, one thing we found is that out of a survey of 14,000 people, this is from a 2018 study, 44% of people responded with the outcomes of climate change and global warming. And so when I look at the chat, going back to the initial question, that's things like floods and droughts, the heat, greenhouse gases. Others also think about the causes, but only 3% think of solutions. And I think if you go back in your head to this question of what comes to mind when you think of climate change and global warming, you'll realize that so much of what we think about is the one half of the story, which is really important, but it's the problems, it's the crisis, it's the melting glaciers, the negative feelings, the loss of biodiversity, anxiety, sadness, apocalypse, doom and gloom, injustice, all things that you added to the chat earlier. But only 3% of what people think about is the solutions. And so where I come in, where Project Drawdown comes in, is in really helping people to see the solutions. And ultimately, it is for the purpose of helping us reach this point of drawdown, which, as you could see, that moment of drawdown, which we're working toward and want to reach, is that little blue dot. And what you're looking at here, just to describe what drawdown is that currently we have the greenhouse gas levels rising in the atmosphere, steadily climbing, unfortunately, due to global warming and climate change. But through climate solutions and through removing more of those greenhouse gases from the atmosphere through some of these solutions or reducing them, we could reach that moment of drawdown and hopefully start to see a path where where our world doesn't have to completely go downhill and where it won't be doom and gloom and like an apocalypse and some of the other things that that folks mentioned in that initial question. So we know that drawdown is possible, and this is a big question that we get. And the reason why at Project Drawdown we know it's possible is because of climate solutions. And so this is just a quick overview of the framework of climate solutions. All of this is available, actually a much deeper dive of each of the solutions is available at drawdown.org. But I would say just as an overview, here is the framework of climate solutions, which really falls into 3 areas. There are the solutions that reduce sources. So those fall within electricity, food, agriculture, and land use, industry, transport, and buildings. There are the solutions that support sinks. So sinks which remove carbon or remove those things from the atmosphere, carbon from the atmosphere. And those sinks are land sinks, coastal and ocean sinks, engineered sinks. And then finally, they're the climate solutions that improve society. So when we support health and education for women, for instance, or when we support health and education more broadly, or when we support equity, that empowers more people with the tools to actually implement solutions and do something about about climate change and global warming. And so we talk about these solutions in this way, and we've talked about them in the Drawdown book. We've talked about them in the Drawdown review, which was an update on the insights in the book from last year. Even this year, we've talked about them in this series, a video series that's available for free on our website called Climate Solutions 101. But the problem is that this doesn't resonate with people oftentimes. Seeing a table of solutions or knowing the science and the data and the facts doesn't always get through to people. And so I won't go into this much, but just to talk about why this doesn't get through to people, I would absolutely encourage people to look up the psychologist and economist Per Espen Stokes. That's P-E-R, the middle name Espen, E-S-P-E-N, and then last name Stokes. And Per Espen Stokes talks a lot about just this, the 5, what he calls the 5 Ds, which really there are 4 D words and 1 I word. But these 5 Ds, distance, doom, dissonance, denial, and identity are 5 of the reasons why people will be hesitant when it comes to doing something about climate action or hesitant when it comes to changing behavior in some kind of way. But something else that he talks about is just this other reality, these things that combat those 5Ds when people are facing the distance, the doom, dissonance, denial, and conflicts with their identity. Stories are really one of the powerful ways to get through to people. The social aspect of things, how we connect with one another, is a powerful way to get people to change their minds and change behaviors. And there are a few of these other S's, which again, I couldn't encourage you enough to learn more, look up Per Espin Stokes, just for more understanding of, some of the psychological aspects of climate storytelling and communicating with people about climate. But the reason I talk about this is because something that kind of comes up through Stokes is this realization that stories do have this power to get through to people, despite them not feeling like climate change is close, despite them feeling like this doom and gloom is going to be an inevitable, despite them feeling like their choices or their community's choices or the groups that they're involved with, their political parties, are doing the right things. Stories have the power to get people to think differently. Our brains love stories, and climate communications, as Per really talks about, can help, could really help people start to understand, or could really benefit from stories if they embrace those to help people understand their role and what they can do. And so I want to just talk about really quickly some of the ways that we're using stories, or what that looks like for Project Drawdown. And we have a number of different storytelling initiatives that we're working on. One of them is called Drawdowns Neighborhood, which is basically realizing that climate change can feel really overwhelming to understand. And there's a lot that you could potentially do. At Project Drawdown, I showed the framework of climate solutions with those 10 sector areas, but I also didn't mention that we have 80 plus climate solutions that you could choose to implement. So that could feel overwhelming. Even thinking about where I would start with one of those is a lot. But with what this series Drawdowns Neighborhood is doing is that it's really focusing on the people. So rather than focus on reduced food waste, and this is a picture of our Project Drawdown website, the page with one of the pages with a lot of the data on one of our solutions. Rather than focusing on this, we're going to focus on stories like the story of Alexis Cromer, who is a food recovery operations associate at 412 Food Rescue at an organization working to do something about food waste, so that people whose stories resonate with Alexis could start to see themselves in reducing food waste. The same goes for a solution like insulation. And another person whose story we are on the verge of featuring is Veni Matal, who is an energy audit and assessment coordinator and really focused on helping people save money and keep efficient homes, which is a climate solution. Or we'll look at something like transportation. And there are so many solutions within the transportation sector. But one of the people that we're highlighting is Sarah Oleksak, who is with the Duquesne Light Company. And again, really focused on using transportation to help cities actually shift to electric vehicles and electrification. So again, rather than focusing on the framework of solutions, we will bring more of these stories to light by talking about the people who are involved with them. Another thing that I'll mention is that this goes even beyond the adults doing the work that they're doing. We are looking to feature all kinds of stories because, again, you can't be what you can't see. So just providing a little preview of something that we'll actually be releasing in the next couple of weeks. We have another series called Project Drawdown Dialogues. And for this first edition of it, we're focusing on youth. And so here are a handful of young people ages, from left to right, 19, 16, and 22, who are all taking climate action. And our idea with this dialogue, our idea with another series we have even called Climate Solutions in Color, is to feature people whose stories are not out in front, whose stories aren't featured, so that more people could see themselves in the climate solutions world, and so that more people could see how they relate and could see stories as a bridge to actually doing something, and could see stories as a bridge to hope and solutions. So one question I have for you, and I know that was a lot I threw at you about, my story about Project Drawdown, how we use storytelling, but it's to really think about what parts of your own story can help someone else to spark action. You all talked about at the beginning how you are really passionate about, or how you're passionate about climate action for a number of different reasons, because of people you've heard from, because of certain information, because of certain stories you've heard. So how could you start to use your story and sharing that with others as a way to encourage others to get involved? Because that's what works for me, not only getting me to go to the climate reality training, but even more getting me to think more deeply out of the training, from hearing Nileli's story of having asthma. How could your story really be something that makes an impact for people? I know that there are a lot of questions that you're thinking through this week, and I stole this from Natasha and all of you. But again, as you kind of think through the different questions about your story and about how you show up in the world and what's relevant or useful, important for you to share, I would encourage you to remember these things listed on the right. Just to remember to tell your story and to make it personal. Like, it's okay that you're not speaking like someone else speaks. It's okay that you're not saying the same facts that, someone that you admire might have. What's most important and resonant for people is your story. And that's what your friends, your community members, the people you have influence with matter. Also speak to your audience. There's not one size fits all, or there's not a one size fits all approach for speaking to any group. And so I would encourage you to really think about who's the audience you're speaking with and how you could get through to them with your story, how you could tailor it to reach them or to speak to them specifically. Another thing I'd say is to show how it supports co-benefits, which essentially just means talk about the ways that climate action is important beyond the numbers. Like, I can't picture what a gigaton of anything looks like. And, a lot of the ways that we've talked about climate solutions in the past are in terms of gigatons impacting the atmosphere, which are important from a scientific perspective. But I would say to really think about what the audience cares about and talk about things like health, like jobs. How does the climate solution that you're advocating for relate to that? Or how do climate solutions relate to the community, and how could they benefit the community more broadly? And then finally, I'd say to always remember to have a simple call to action. So if there's one call to action I could leave you all with, it is to really dive in and to spend time thinking about your story, to value your story, and to use your story, which I really see as your power, your own real world superpower. So thanks everyone for having me, and I will hand it back to Natasha for what's next. And I'm going to stop sharing.
Wow, thank you so much, Matt. That was just wonderful to hear about your journey to becoming a storyteller, and that personal experience that led you to start really focusing in on climate. So thank you so much. I know we've all really learned a lot. So I have some questions that are coming up in the chat that I'm going to share with you. So I love this question from Daniel. So I'm going to ask Daniel to just unmute and ask your question as you've written it here.
Okay, first I want to congratulate Scott. Your presentation is just amazing and very motivating. I want to know, who are these people who are often not heard in the climate fight?
Yeah. Thank you for asking that question. And I saw it too when you shared it in the chat, Daniel. So I think, very broadly, something I would say for you all to think about is, like, anytime that you're in a room, what voices are not being heard, what voices are not being represented in that room or conversation. So for instance, and I think of the Climate Reality Project as a great example of this. When I was in Los Angeles, a lot of the people who were speaking were longtime environmental activists. A lot of them were white people, which that's the majority, definitely here in the US, and a lot of the voices that are heard in the US. And so I would say that like something I would encourage is whatever context you're in, like if you are in a room of all men, how do you make sure that you're incorporating voices of like people who are not men? How do you make sure you're bringing in people whose experiences are different from the ones that are already in the room? Because something that a lot of studies have found is just the value of diversity. Like diversity makes organizations stronger. It makes them more profitable. It makes them better at problem solving. So when we have that diversity, we're also able to apply that to address climate change. And so the simple, I think the most correct answer is the people who aren't in the room or who aren't being heard, whose perspectives aren't valued, need to be heard. But that differs on different contexts. But I would say to think about like people's class, like are only people with money being heard? Are only people with power being heard? Are only men being heard, which is the case in most places, so just to consider that. But for like the way that I often talk about it is in the US context, like people of color, it's thinking of people with disabilities, often women in different cases, the LGBT community, like just different types of people need to be, heard from, just so we can make sure that we integrate their perspectives too, which will often have solutions and ideas that we wouldn't think of otherwise. That was a long answer, but I hope that was really comprehensive and helpful for everyone.
Thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate that. And we're gonna hear from Amarachi. She has this awesome question that was a question that I was curious about as well, with regard to like what, good storytelling, like what makes good stories. So Amarachi, may you ask your question, please?
Okay. My question is, I have like two questions. Like, you told us a lot of stories, and really it's inspiring. So how can one really craft those kind of stories to inspire people, especially when you are talking to a layman, somebody who is not really in the field, or somebody who does not know about the cost or something of that nature. So how can you do all of those and still come out to be very true, like not adding up so many other things, but realistic information? Yeah, that's one of my questions. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amarachi. And I'll say that so there are a lot of things to think about here, but I think my simplest answer would be to think about your audience. Always think about your audience. Something that I think is challenging that a lot of folks might do when it comes to any issue, but including climate change, is that we sometimes think we need a story, and then we have to go share that story with everybody. But what I think is actually probably more helpful, or one of the things that's more helpful, is to start by like understanding who your audience is, what do they care about. And so to me, one thing you made me think of is just the value of conversation. It could be really helpful to sit down and learn about the audience and what do they know about climate change and global warming and climate solutions already, if anything. What do they value otherwise beyond climate change? Like, do they have kids that they care? Like, do they have kids? Do they have a job in a certain field? It's good to understand who they are, because then you could understand why they would care about climate change and about global warming. Because if someone, for instance, says that they care about jobs, well, one of the things about climate solutions is that climate solutions mean opportunities. They mean more jobs. They mean, more efficient systems where we actually save and make more money in the long run once we implement those things, when we move away from more destructive practices. So it all really depends on what your audience cares about. That's the general answer. But one thing that I've talked about from time to time in presentations on storytelling is something that is called the 6 E's of engagement. So essentially, it's just different things to think about, or different 5 or 6 E words to think about when you think about how you could really effectively reach people. So off the top of my head, hopefully I remember them all. One of them is entertainment. How are we entertaining people? Another is empower. Another is elevate. Another is entice. And the 5th is educate. And then I always forget one of them, but I will post a link to the 6 E's of engagement in the chat here. But essentially, it's just a good gut check to think about. Here's one link that talks about it, actually, from an organization I did some work with a while ago. But basically, again, the 6 E's are the word ease, E-A-S-E, elevate, empower, entertain, educate, entice. Think about these things. Think about how you're educating. Think about how you're entertaining, enticing, elevating people and their perspectives, empowering them to take action. And that will actually help, get you a long way for doing something that resonates with them.
Thanks so much, Matt. We have a question from Ria, which I'll let her introduce her question.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Matt. My question is how you build confidence in others who might be hesitant to share their stories, because I think a common kind of statement is that people might say that, oh, your story is valid, but how do you actually get that person to, believe that as well?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and something that I think it's interesting because I have experience with this a lot personally too, like figuring out that my story was important to share, and it's something that I've been integrating more into talks, workshops, even just conversations. So I didn't say this earlier, but I've thought about this a little bit, was just that, whenever you're in a space where you are where you're not seeing your story represented, or you're not being told your story is valid, or you think, well, they only care about this kind of story, and you can't find people whose stories relate. To me, that is the trigger to see that your story is important. Now, to your question, it's still hard to think I'm not confident in sharing my story, but I took a course about this earlier this year. And one thing they talked about is just focusing less on yourself in the moment, or focusing less on ourselves, I'll say, and focusing more on the bigger impact. So rather than me even being worried about being nervous or being introverted, or or not feeling comfortable sharing, or just it taking a lot of effort and time and wanting to be perfect, I think the thing that I've done personally to keep that confidence is just remember that there are when you share your story, there are other people who need to hear that story to see that they are valid and that their stories are valid, but also that there's the ripple effect of those stories. And when you share your story, that has a bigger impact to help other people feel confident, to help other people feel like they belong. So I think it's such a big question, but the biggest thing I'd say is just remember that it's a lot bigger than the person themselves. And I think a lot more of us, for me, if the question is, do you want to share your story for your sake, for people to hear from you? I might be I don't know. But then if you frame it as, well, it's inspiring people, it's helping people learn, it's educating them, it's entertaining them, it's helping them feel empowered, all of those things, I think that's a good way to help people get that confidence to share. And honestly, the more that you share, the more confident you become. So it's not something that happens overnight, but that's a great a great question, because I think that I can imagine that being a block for most people who haven't shared their stories a lot. But just know, like, again, if you don't hear your story out there, that's, you know, it means it's even more important to share your story so someone else could see themselves, because they probably don't see themselves either in whatever you're talking about.
Thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate that answer. Yeah, beautifully said. So I'd love to hear from Dalton. He had a really great question about, you know, your journey getting started. Dalton, could you unmute?
Yeah, so the question that I had is, what was the most difficult part getting started as a climate leader and sharing your story with people, and how did you navigate around that?
That's a great question. It's a great question. A lot to think about. So, you know, I'll start with the easiest part, actually. Maybe that'll help me get to the most difficult one. The easiest part is that there are so many different resources to get started. Like, so I mentioned the climate reality leadership trainings, which were like completely free trainings. You just had to get yourself there somehow, but they're free trainings. There are courses like this one, again, tons of great resources that way. I do think, though, that one of the things that was toughest for me personally was just that I didn't see or hear from a lot of people who I could relate to. So I think if, like, for instance, if I had like friends, or if I had people who I identified with more, say, Matt, I know you, and I also know that this would be something that you're really good at and that would be really important for you personally to do. I think that was the biggest barrier for me. And again, a lot of it comes back to the last question from Ria about confidence. Like, sometimes it's just you know, I think of imposter syndrome a lot, and I talk about that to like different groups when I'm talking sometimes, just because it's easy for us to be in a space where, like, again, if you are the only woman or the only person in some kind of way, like you're the only person with your interests or your personality, it's easy to not feel like you fully belong and that you deserve to be there. And that, I think, was probably my biggest challenge, and something I kind of had to realize, like, oh, there are people like me who are here, and also my perspective super valuable in a space when it's super rare. So that's what I would say is probably the toughest part. But I think it's easier more than ever to get involved in the climate space. Like, so many jobs are becoming climate jobs, and it's amazing that there will be those opportunities for you, those of you who are looking for like careers in climate action.
Thanks so much, Matt. I think we have time for just one more question. So I'm gonna ask Rohini if you could please ask your question, come off mic, and try to just read it as you've written it, so we have time to hear Matt's response.
Yeah, so one of my questions was, so there are a lot of stories that come up in conflict with climate solutions. For just few examples, in India, there have been a lot of protests against plants that are waste to energy or recycling for various issues. So when you have this kind of clash between, you know, giving space to stories and pursuing climate solutions, how does one go about trying to find a middle ground there?
Yeah, is your question, Rohini, more about like, is it about sharing science compared with the stories, or could you explain just a little bit more of that?
No. Suppose someone's trying to build a recycling plant. So I'll give an example. So someone was trying to build a recycling plant for urban waste, but it was in a rural area. So the people of that village naturally started protesting. So, but you know, one could argue that putting that plant there was a way of pursuing climate solutions, and they might try to say that giving space to the villager stories would obstruct that goal. So how do you go about trying to find a middle ground here?
That's where the science and the data are so important. Everything that we do at Project Drawdown is like all of the solutions that we talk about are science-backed and data-backed. And so even when we talk about stories, for example, like if I talk about Alexis, who is doing work to reduce food waste, then I could come back to the like the climate solutions page on our website or in the Drawdown book and talk about reducing food waste and the data. So I think something that's really critical is like really being sure that they are like, where's the data that they have for doing this thing, is for taking some kind of action that they claim is better. It's really, I think, easy for people to share a story that might not be like the most accurate story, but that's where it's so important to point to the data and to loop that in. And I think one way to combat misinformation is with factual information. So sharing the statistics and data about what would be a great solution or why what they're doing isn't a great practice. And then also stories are also great because like something that I think is good from different contexts, not in climate change, but like if people in those rural communities are not happy with that change, there's definitely an opportunity to share those voices and stories in some kind of way. I know that that's different in different countries. Like I don't know what that's like outside of New Delhi or in New Delhi, for instance. But I think that it's one thing that I love to do, and one reason like I love my phone, for instance, especially in 2021, is like you could record audio messages or video messages, and social media is a great way to be heard by more people than ever would have heard that perspective and advocated. And so if anything, it's like combat misinformation with proper information. There are great resources for actual climate solutions on drawdown.org, for example, and other climate spaces. But yeah, that's tough. That's a really tough situation. And I appreciate you asking, Rohini. And back to you, Natasha.
Matt, thank you so much for being with us and for sharing your wisdom. You've answered these questions beautifully, and I know we're going to have a lot to talk about on Saturday. Thank you for being with us, and I'd love if everyone would just join me in sending our thanks to Matt and yeah, and just saying goodbye. I'd love if everyone could stay on for 1 minute, just so I can let you know a little bit about next class.
Can I just ask one thing before everybody goes away? When Matt's still here, we want to take a shot of everybody, since we're not really together. The pictures of us in squares become very resonant. So could we have everybody look forward, big smiles, and we'll take a picture. So 1, 2, 3. And make sure we get both pages. Grace, are you good? Do you have pictures? Yeah. Matt, thank you for just a beautiful moment in time as we start our journey as a team, and your inspiration was really incredible. Thanks for the work you're doing for all of us in this world.
No, thank you. And thanks all of you. And really, I'm excited to hear more about what comes from the course and from each of you. So definitely reach out to Project Drawdown. And I would say too, especially because this isn't a big group, that I will, like, if folks have any thoughts or questions, and I'll try to get back to you, I will drop my LinkedIn. I'm just typing this in here, but I'm dropping my LinkedIn into the chat in case you want to connect there and be in touch. But thanks again, everyone, for having me.
Thanks.
Thank you, Matt.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Awesome. So I want to let us go on time, but I just wanted to say that Judy and I will be hosting weekly office hours. These are times when you can book a time to come and talk to us about anything related to the course. It's also a time for you to get to know us a little better, since we're often, have to keep time in these larger sessions. So it's a time where you can just come and chat. We'd love if you would email us just to let us know that you'll be coming at a certain time. Those exact times are in the syllabus that we've shared with everyone. I've emailed it to you all. It's also been in the chat. But my first office hours will be today, actually, in 30 minutes. So, and I'll be there I'm available for a window, and you can just send me an email if you'd like to come to those. If you want to share thoughts about what Matt talked about, or if you have any questions. And then we're looking forward to next Saturday. This Saturday, we'll be hearing from Erin Schrody, Judy's wonderful daughter, and also the co-founder of Turning Green. And we'll also hear from Dr. Jagannatha Pavantambada, who will share his wisdom as well. And we'll be thinking through this theme of personal storytelling, activating your voice, and actually workshopping some ideas and doing a little bit of work around that. So thanks so much, everyone. It's been wonderful to see you all, and we'll see you.
I have one more thing before everybody goes away. So Takunda, thank you for your question. He asked about social media and hashtags. It would be awesome for you guys to share bits and moments. You're welcome to, quote speakers. You're welcome to tag them. If you guys wouldn't mind hashtagging PGC course, PG course 2021, and anything you post, maybe it'll be a beautiful way for us to spread the word. And we will start also adding content to the website so that will capture the talks, so you can review them and look at them and take wisdom from them. So thank you all for showing up and for being on this wild and crazy journey to heal the planet. We're gonna get there. So keep hoping. We'll see you Saturday. And as well, if you need to ask any questions anytime, also feel free to text or email. I'm eternally around. Love hearing from all of you guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.